Hey everyone, welcome to my online tutorial. This is what I'm doing with my time in lockdown, stage 4 restrictions, staying at home, getting a lot more stuff done. So my plan is to make a tutorial to help everybody with creating at home if they can't come to one of my classes or they're not finding the right information online. So I'm going to run you through the basics first, which is using a horizontal flask and casting a pendant with no stones, and then a ring with no stones with the horizontal flask. And then we can move on to doing tutorials with casting in place rough sapphires. And at some stage, I'll show you how to use the vertical flask. Unfortunately, I haven't found many places that sell the vertical little flask. There is a guy in America who does, but I've just modified my horizontal flask. I've literally just cut a square out of it, and then I've got a vertical flask. So it's a great option to have. All right, so I'll start by running through all the tools that you will need. You don't have to have these tools exactly, but something similar to these tools so that you can do all the things you need to do. I'll show you. Alrighty, so I've got pawpaw ointment to help stick my stones in the mold and stop them from moving around when I pour the molten metal in. You don't have to use pawpaw ointment, you could just use some sort of Vaseline based goop, something that's sort of sticky but will incinerate. Alrighty, a paintbrush, some tweezers, fine tips are better, a sharp pokey thing, a fat pokey thing, a knifey tool, a straw, a ruler, talcum powder that I put in this little container, hammer, and additional bits to make your life easier are bolt cutters. So you can cut off those sprues and keep casting really quickly instead of sitting there and breaking 5 saw blades cutting through your sprue. These are the best things I bought. Make sure you get this extra articulated, section because then it's like power steering rather than doing it manually, which is a pain in the ass and you can't do. Alrighty. Also, it's a great thing to have like a waste bucket for all of your burnt pieces of clay. I'm just gonna use this. Alrighty. So for the very first piece, I'm gonna be doing just a pendant. Plain, no stones. And I'm gonna be using the horizontal flask, just so I can show you the absolute basics. So we're building we've got a foundation that we can build upon. So once you sort of get the basics, I'm going to build upon that and build upon that until hopefully in the future I'll be doing more advanced tutorials for people who just get addicted and want to learn how to do everything. All right, here we go. Alrighty, so we've got our flask. It comes in 2 parts. We've got the part that's got the exposed lip, and we've got the part that has a recessed lip. So the exposed lip is the male half, the recessed lip is the female half. And we've got the registration mark right there, so it's important to always line up that registration mark so that your object inside is always going to be lined up. Alrighty, I've got my object. We always start with the male half first. We want to work with this surface. We're going to flip it over and pack it from behind. The main reason why we're packing it from behind is because I'm about to hit this with a hammer to compress that clay. And if I'm whacking on the outside of this flask, I'm going to be damaging it. But it's okay if it's the outside section I'm damaging. But if I was to be hitting a hammer on that lip, eventually my two halves wouldn't fit together because I'd damaged this lip so much. So just for the longevity of your flask, always hammer it from behind. Alrighty. So see how there's some cracks going on here? It's not a big problem, but if you are worried, you can just pick up a bit of clay and smush it in those little cracks. Just like that. Alright. Now, see how the back of this is sitting proud? We want this to be flush. We don't want it to be concave or convex. Flush is perfect. So that's where this ruler comes in to play. You just scrape that excess clay off the back so that it sits nice and flat. The reason why you don't want that concave is because when you're pressing your object in here, you don't want that clay to give way. You want it to be supported. Alrighty, so I get my talcum powder, got my paintbrush, and let's paint on that talcum powder. That acts as a little barrier so that two clay halves don't stick together, but it also helps your object not get stuck. Helps your object come out easier. So I'm going to place it, in the middle. I'm going to use my fingers to push it in to about halfway. If you find that you can't quite push your object in with your fingers, you can use your ruler, and it just helps distribute that pressure a little bit more. Halfway is best, but not always necessary. Alrighty. Now I'm going to put the female on top, lining up those registration marks, and I'm going to pack it. So it's always best to get some crumbly clay first and push it around your object with your fingers to make sure that clay is tightly packed around your object. Go pick up all that beautiful detail. Alright, now I can put in bigger blocks. Alrighty, hammer time. Alrighty. Ruler's great for scraping all this clay out of the way too. Alright, cutting off that excess clay again because we want to have both these surfaces flush. Alright, so when, popped open for me, which is not a problem. But when you do open it up, you don't want to twist it open, you want to pull it apart nice and evenly. Wasn't a problem in this case, it just came on open. Alright, so you can see that great impression. And it'll be the same on the other side. Getting your object out can be kind of tricky. So I'm going to use my tweezers. There we go. Cool, great impression. Put my object to the side. See that little lump of clay there from where the hole is in this pendant? I don't really want that there. I don't want there to be a hole in my pendant. So I'm just going to use my little sharp poker and I'm just going to cut it off. Alrighty. So now I've got to create a sprue hole and funnel so that we can pour that molten metal inside of this negative space. Got to sort of think about where I want to put that sprue because it will unfortunately cover up all of this beautiful texture. So you've got to be a bit strategic, and I'm thinking perhaps what I might do for this one I could sacrifice a section of it, which will be the back of the piece, or I could put it on the inside here where there's no texture, but I think I'd still lose some of that texture and I really want the metal to flow in here. I don't want it to come in a tight little space, so what the hell, let's go for, just make it a blank space. All right, I'm gonna do it on this side. It doesn't matter if you do your sprue hole and funnel on your male side or your female side, just whatever is the back of the piece usually. And seeing as this object doesn't have an obvious front or back, I'm basing my decision on how good the impression is in the sand. I feel like the impression in this one is much deeper and cleaner, and therefore I would say this is the face of the pendant, where this detail is shallower, a little bit more blurry. So let's say this is the back. So I'm going to do my sprue hole and funnel on this side so that I'm not disturbing anything on this perfect replica here. I'm going to set that female aside for now. Alrighty. So I've been using a straw to make my sprue hole because it acts like an apple corer and cuts out the clay. Rather than using a fat poker, which is what I used to do, I'd use the fat poker to press a hole into the clay, and it would spread the design and it would disturb it a little bit and distort it. But with the straw, it's a much cleaner process. So I'm going to put this right there. And I'm going to get it to go all the way through. Just cutting out a hole all the way through. Just like that. That's a good hole. Alrighty, funnel time. So the straw's conveniently knocked out some of this clay, which is not a problem at all because I'm about to carve a funnel. So it's sort of done my work for me. So I've got my knifey tool and I'm just gonna carve out a funnel. You want this funnel to be fairly deep. You want it to go almost all the way down to that negative space, that object's negative space, because we don't want that silver bottlenecking for any longer than it has to. Right, I've sort of filled in this hole a little bit by creating a funnel, but let's just poke out all that clay that's gotten in there. Alright, we have to make sure that this sprue hole and funnel is nice and clean. We don't want any loose bits of clay floating around in there, because when we pour our molten metal in, those loose bits of clay follow that silver into your mold and they become really nasty bits of porosity, or they can adhere to the surface of your casting and create horrible holes. So let's just make sure our funnel and our sprue hole are nice and clean. I like to go over it with the back of my paintbrush like a rolling pin, and I'm just smushing down all of that loose clay. And then with my sharp tool, I like to go into that hole and run it around, burnishing that clay nice and flat. So now you've got a really nice clean funnel and a clean sprue hole. Alright, last thing I do before I close this up in cast is I need to create an air vent. So I need a way for the air that's trapped in this negative space to escape. If I didn't create an air vent and the air couldn't escape, then it stops the metal from flowing properly because there's a bubble and the metal can't get around it because the air can't go anywhere. But if I create an air vent, the air is able to rush out of that little hole, and as it's vacating that negative space, it's creating a vacuum, which is sucking that silver into the flask, which I can use to my advantage. So if the metal's coming in this section here, I really want to make sure it's going to flow around either side here and crash in the middle here, fuse together, completing my casting. So I'm going to put my air vent down here because I really want to encourage that silver to flow all the way down here. I've done a little channel, and I'm not doing it where my sharp tool is straight up because then that pills the clay. It's quite messy. What I'm doing is I'm coming down on quite a strong horizontal, and I'm just pretty much smushing that clay down to create a channel so it's nice and clean. And then at the end of that channel, I'm going to use my pokey tool to just poke all the way through. so that the air can escape out of this air vent right there. And you only ever do the air vent on the same side as your sprue hole and funnel. Always sprue hole and funnel, air vent, one side. Alrighty, so I've got my air vent, which I might open up a little bit more so I know it's absolutely there. Got my air vent, my sprue hole, my funnel, and they're clean and ready to go. Last now is just to close up this flask, making sure those registration marks are lining up, and we're good to go. Alrighty, so always wear safety glasses when you're doing melting, and it's a good idea to have a ventilation mask because it can get quite smoky. Alrighty, so I've got my mini Smith torch, I've got LPG gas, and I've got oxygen. You can get both of these from Bunnings. Use a size 7 tip. It's nice and big, but it's not too big. I'm using a size 6 that's been modified, just means I've drilled out this hole so it's a little bit bigger. Kind of destroyed my size 7 tip. Alrighty. Let's turn on our gas, ignite it, introduce some oxygen. So we just want to do oxygen gas until we get a nice big flame. So that's a pretty big, angry flame. Alright, so your dominant hand is on the crucible handle at all times because you've got to be in control of the molten metal. Now I'm using a casting I did a little while ago that I didn't quite like in the end, so I'm just melting it down again. So the hottest part of your flame is actually about 2 centimeters away from that bright blue tip. That's where the most heat is, and that's where you sort of want to have your torch positioned to do maximum melting. Alright, so that's looking pretty good. I'm rolling that around a bit. This crucible has been seasoned with borax, so I don't really need to add any more borax to the metal, but if I feel like the metal's quite dirty, I can always add more borax to it. Alright, so that's rolling around nicely, and it's a nice clean surface. Like I don't have anything on the surface of that. It looks like a mirror or mercury. Alright, so bring your crucible up against your flask, so have it resting against your flask. And tip your crucible so it's just about to pour in, but not quite yet. Aiming your torch on that lip that you're about to pour from, but you're keeping the metal hot, you're heating up that lip, and probably keep it there for about 5 seconds, and then really confidently pour the metal down the hole, all in one go. 1, 2, 3, down the hatch. Got a little bit of left over, but that's alright. Alright, and turning your torch off. Oxygen first, then your gas. People often ask me, how do I know how much metal I need to use? And I just say, I guess. I guess, and then I double it, just in case. Because it's always good to have about 10 grams more than you actually need. Alright, I just put my mask on because it's a bit smoky. Alright, so straight away, the flask is not hot unless you poured metal on the flask, but I didn't. It's all in the clay. The clay is a fantastic insulator. So at the moment, it's not hot. The silver is piping hot though, so don't touch that. So if you're anything like me and you can't contain your excitement, I want to open it up straight away, which is ideal because it's not hot straight away. But if I was to leave this to sit 3 minutes, the heat would disperse through that clay and then through this aluminium frame, and I wouldn't be able to touch it. It'd be too hot. So lucky for me, right when my excitement is at its peak, I can open it. All right, so let's open it up, flip it over and put it back down on top of itself. That way, that button isn't going to touch anything and melt it, or you're not going to touch it with your fingers. Cool. Alrighty, so getting this out of the clay, the easiest way to do it is, see where that button is? That's the hardest part to get out. So we're gonna pop our tweezers where that sprue is, and we're going to have them against this flask, and we're just levering them out, just like that. If I was to grab the object from this side and lever it out like that with that button as like a plug, as an anchor, I could bend this casting because it's quite soft. We've just cast it, it's super annealed. So it's always best to grab it at its strongest point, which is where that sprue is. All right, so pull that up. I've got my dustpan here so I can put in my burnt bits of clay, because you can't reuse the burnt bits of clay, unfortunately. It just comes off nice and easy. Make sure you're always using metal tools, because if you're using plastic, it'll melt. Cool. Nice. So there is going to be a section at the back here that's not going to have this cool crisscrossing texture. I could chop it off, file it back flush, and then go back in with an engraving tool and repeat that design so it looks flawless. But what I think I will do is I'm just going to cut it off, file it flat, and I'm going to put my maker's mark and the sterling silver stamp there. So it's like a little feature plaque spot. Alrighty, so in case some of you were wondering what I was talking about when I said you could file down that sprue and turn it into like a little plaque where your stamp can go, well, I'm not sure if you can see that, but that's what I meant. So I just gave this a quick cleanup. It's pretty much ready to just go on a chain if I wanted it to. Just like that. Alrighty, so the next one we're going to be making will be again a horizontal one, and again it's a pendant, but this time there's going to be a stone, just so that we can build on our basic understanding of sand casting. So I'm going to be using a rough sapphire with this design. Let's get into it. So just like with before, we're going to be starting on the male side. You always have to start with the male side, and we put it face down, lip side down, and pack it from behind. It's always best to start off with some loose crumbly clay and then add your bigger chunks in. Alrighty, and using your hammer, compact it. Got some cracks in there, so let's just fill that in. Give it a little bit of a hit again. Alright, and then using that ruler, cut off that excess. Alrighty. Let's tap and powder up this surface before we lay in our object. So I'm going with this design. I like circles, can you tell? Using the ruler to press it into halfway because it's easier to do it. It disperses that pressure more evenly. Alrighty, putting the female on top, lining up that registration mark. Now let's add some crumbly loose clay. Pressing it down with our fingers, making sure it's nice and tight around that object. Alright, now we can add some chunkier pieces. Alright, hammer. Alright, cut off that excess. Now, let's open it up nice and evenly. No twisting it open, just apart nice and evenly. There we go. Now, because this design's a little bit shallower than I want it to be, I want it to be a bit thicker. Like, it's a bit thin at the moment. So what I want to do is I'm just going to press this shape in deeper into both sides, which means that when I go to cast it, it's going to be a thicker version of this design. Bit of a trick, little cheeky trick. Alrighty. Now, before I get a bit carried away with placing stones, I'm going to have to do a bit of work, which is my sprue hole and funnel. So, got my straw. Think about where I'm going to put the sprue. Well, I want to have my stone down the bottom, so I'll put my sprue hole up here. I'll put it right in the middle at the top. Alright, let's push it all the way through. Alright, now let's carve out that funnel. Using my knifey tool, I'm going to carve that funnel out. Again, making sure I'm going fairly deep. Let's clean that hole out. I sort of filled it with some clay. Got to make sure that that funnel is nice and clean. Don't want any of that loose clay following the silver in, causing problems. Alright. Sprue hole and funnel are sorted. So there it is. Let's set that aside for now. And pull out my stone. So this is called a specimen, a specimen sapphire from Lava Plain. Alrighty. So let's have a look at where we put that sprue hole and funnel. Cool. Alright, so we put the sprue hole and funnel at this end, which means I want to place my stone at the opposite end. I don't want it to be directly near the flow of the metal, if I can help it. I don't want the metal being poured right down onto that stone, because it will go into thermoshock and probably shatter. Because it'll shatter. Alrighty, so I want my stone to be about there. I'm going to press it in and pull it out again. Got to remember which way it was going. Actually, I changed my mind. I want it to go that way. Alright, pressing it in again. Pulling it out again. I don't want it to go too deep. I don't want it to be any deeper than this pendant impression. So that's ideal where it is now. Alright, so we need a way for the silver to be able to get around that stone and hold it in place. So at the moment, the silver's just going to kiss the bottom of where that stone's going to be. I want it to come up and around and hold that stone in place. So I'm just going to create a channel for that silver to follow, making way for it to come up and around that sapphire. I don't have to remove as much material as I am. I'm just doing it because it's going to create this sort of like lacy organic effect of metal coming up to hold it in place. If I don't like it, once I cast it, I can always just cut it out. Alright, I'm going to get my stone. I'm going to lay it back in. Alright, I'm going to close this mold and open it again. Lining up those registration marks, very important. So, now I've got a pretty clear impression of where the stone's going to be on the other side. So I know where I've got to remove a bit of material, a bit of clay, make room for that silver to flow up around that stone. Cool. Simple as that. Don't need any pour in this case because that stone's not going anywhere. It's sandwiched between two clay halves of this mold. Last thing we do before we close it up and cast is I need an air vent. I really want the silver to come around this stone. So I want it to come down here and around that stone. So I might do two air vents. One leading off here to ensure that the object casts properly. So one air vent there. And the other air vent I'm going to put up in here to really encourage that metal to come up around that stone. There we go. Okay, so let's close that and cast. Alrighty, remembering safety glasses. Alright, so I'm going to turn my gas on, ignite it, introduce oxygen gas until we get a nice big angry hot flame. That's pretty good. Alright, dominant hand on the crucible handle so that I'm always in control of that molten metal. The hottest part of the flame is about 2 centimeters away from that bright blue part. I'm using all this scrap metal. It's a great way to get rid of scrap. Alrighty, that metal is looking good, nice and molten. If you're not sure if it's hot enough, doesn't hurt to sit here for another 10 seconds. Just making sure it's absolutely smoking. Alright, so bring that crucible over to your flask, rest it against your flask, aiming that heat where that lip is. So you're heating up that lip and you're keeping that metal hot. Hold it there for another 5 seconds, and then when you're feeling nice and confident and ready, you're going to throw the metal down the hole. You're just going to go 1, 2, 3, down the hatch. Oxygen off, then gas. Alright, I'm about to put my mask on. Okay, exciting. Let's see if it worked. Cool. Awesome. Let's get it out of the sand. So, check where that sprue is. It's right there, big button. Get my tweezers, go on either side of that sprue, holding the flask and letting the tweezers lever out. Getting my little waste bucket, my metal tool, awesome. So if I didn't want all of that extra metal up around that stone, I can just get in there with my saw blade and cut around that stone if I wanted to. Alright, let's get rid of this burnt clay. Alright, so you don't ever put your castings, your freshly cast castings, in water to quench them. You only do that if you've got no stones. If you've got stones in them, you cannot quench them. The stones will shatter. So just let them cool down naturally. Alright, let's cut off that sprue. Love it, love it. And then we can reuse that. And that'll be really easy to clean up. Just chop that off, file it back a little bit. There, then file that back a little bit. I quite like this lacy look, so I'm going to leave that. Alrighty, so here it is cleaned up. I think I'll probably blacken it and then polish it back again, so the liver of sulfur, which is what I use to blacken it, gets in all those cracks and crevices and just really accentuates the texture and makes it look so much deeper and more interesting than what it is. Well, makes it look really deep. It's really interesting already. Can't make it more interesting. So I'm pretty happy with that. And you can't even tell where the sprue was. Alrighty. Now we're moving on to doing rings. So in the horizontal flask, again, we're going to be doing just a plain ring, no stone, because it's a little bit different than doing a pendant. So I've got this wax, this organic freeform looking wax that I've created, and I'm going to use that as the master. All right, let's make a ring. Okay, so starting on the male, as always, lip side down, crumbly clay first. Pack it in with your fingers, and then bigger chunks of clay. And compressing with the hammer. Using the ruler to scrape off that excess. Alright, if you're worried about those cracks, you can just get clay, fill them in. Alrighty, talcum powder. So that your two clay halves don't stick together, and so your object comes out of the clay much easier. Alrighty, ring. Pop it in, press it into about halfway. Alright, put the female on top, lining up that registration mark. Getting crumbly loose clay first, pressing it in with your fingers, and then get some bigger chunks. And compressing it with a hammer. Alright, scraping off that excess. Don't screw it open, just open it nice and evenly. Just like that. Alright, so getting this ring out can be a little bit tricky, so your fine nose tweezers will do a good job. There we go. And if any of your clay bits are raised up, just push them back down gently. It's not a problem. Alright, sprue hole and funnel time. I'm going to do it in this male side. And I'm going to do it where this registration mark is. It's just a really good habit to get into. At the moment, it won't make sense, but once I start using stones, it'll make heaps more sense. So right there, where that registration mark is. Alrighty, let's cut a funnel. Again, you want to go nice and deep, almost breaking through, but not quite. That hole is a bit dirty, so let's clean it up. Funnel must be clean, sprue hole must be clean. Cool. Got a little bit of clay in there, let's get that out. Alrighty. Well, air vent. It's pretty straightforward. Right there. Coming out. Let's open this up a little bit. Lining up those registration marks. Boom, ready to cast. Alrighty, safety glasses on. So we're going to do something just a little bit different with this one. We're going to get a little thing to put this flask on a bit of an angle, just a slight angle, so that when that metal goes in there, it's got that gravity to help force it down. Alright. Gas. Oxygen gas, oxygen gas. So you've got a nice hot flame. Alright. And melt. Alright, that's rolling around nicely. Bring it on over to our flask. Focusing that heat on that lip that we're about to pour from. Keeping that metal nice and hot, heating up that lip, and then when we're feeling confident and ready, we're going to throw this metal down the hole. 1, 2, 3, down the hatch. Just like that. Oxygen off, then gas. Alright, it's going to get smoky, so put your mask on. Can never wait to open it. Still like flaming, and I'm going to open it. Cool. Awesome, let's get it out of there. Alright, still smoking away. Alright, so I know that our sprue hole, our button is right here. So using the tweezers, lever it out. Let's get our waste bucket. Let's break off all that burnt clay. It's very smoky, this one. I must have got the metal extra hot. Cool. So that's that air vent. The metal was trying to follow the air vent. It's usually a good sign that you got your metal nice and hot. Cool. Alright, so I'd use the bolt cutters to cut it off here. And then I would saw pierce that off, saw pierce this down more flush, file the inside, and maybe give the outside a light file, or maybe I'll go for it with a hammer just to give it a different texture. Okay. Alrighty, so that little ring's all cleaned up now. And I'm thinking perhaps blackening this one as well. Maybe setting a few stones in it. Hey, ring made. All right, so the part that everyone's probably desperately waiting for, which is how to cast a ring with a stone cast in place. So let's get to it. Alrighty, I'm gonna do just a plain ring with just a little stone. Show you how to do it. Alright, start by filling up this flask. Male side first, lip down, hammer it from behind. Alright, scrape off any excess. Now talcum powder up that surface. Alrighty. Pop your ring in, about halfway. Then put the lady flask on top, lining up those registration marks. Alright, crumbly clay first, pressing with your fingers, and then big chunks of clay. The excess. Right, open it up nice and even. Like that. Alright, let's get this ring out. Alrighty. So before I get too excited about putting in the stone, let's do some work first, which is your air vent, your sprue hole in your funnel. So, registration mark. Yeah, I'll do it on this side, male side. So I've got my registration mark. I'm going to do my sprue hole and funnel right there, where that registration mark is. Flip it over, let's carve out that funnel, making sure to go deep. Clean that hole out, making sure that funnel is clean from debris. I'm going to pop that ring back in and give it a little spin around just to doubly make sure that it's nice and clean. Alrighty. So I'm going to put my stone in the female half. Alright, so you can see where that registration mark is, which means that's where the metal is going to be poured in. So I'm going to place my stone at the opposite end. See how there's like this little gap here? This little crack? If you're worried about that, you can fix it right now. Get a little bit of clay, pop it there, just repair that crack. Voila! Alright, stone time. This is where the pour is going to be introduced. Alright, now have a little bit of a perv on your stone and decide which is the most attractive surface, which is the part you want to see. Well, I reckon that's pretty nice. Alrighty, put a bit of pour on the surface you want to see. Doesn't have to be heaps. Alright. See how the stone is taking up all of that room? So there's no way for the silver to get underneath it or over the top of it or around it. It is blocking the silver completely. That's not ideal. We want to have room for the silver to flow somewhere around that stone. Underneath it's always a good one. So I like to grab the stone and just bring it up through that clay. Just like that, so that now there's about a 1 millimeter gap for that silver to flow underneath. Now that's going to be a nice and secure design. Alright, so let's open and close these flasks to see where that stone impression is on this other side, and also make sure that stone's not going to move. Registration marks lining up, open and close. So now I've got a little impression of where that stone's going to go on this side. So let's clear the way a little bit so that the silver can get up and around that stone. Let's carve a little bit of clay away around here. so that some metal can come up and around that stone. Let's do the same here. If it's easier, you can remove the stone and then place it back in. Or you can just leave the stone in place like I have. I want to make sure this stone's nice and clean. You don't want any bits of clay sticking on this stone, because if there's clay on the stone, the silver won't be able to hold the stone snugly in place because you've got this clay barrier. So you've got to make sure that any part that the silver is going to touch of this stone, it's clean of loose bits of clay. Just a bit of loose clay down here. Let me get rid of that. Alright, cool. Air vents. Air vents go on the same side as the sprue hole and funnel. Always, always. I'm just going to do 2 channels on either side of that stone because I really want to make sure that metal comes up and around that stone. Alright. Cool. Let's close this up and cast. I've used that file to prop up that flask just so that that gravity helps feed all the metal down around that stone. Dominant hand on the crucible handle at all times so that you're always in control of what's happening to this metal. Alright, that's looking pretty good. Bring it on over to your flask, rest it against the edge. Aim that torch at the lip, simultaneously heating that metal and the lip at the same time. When you're feeling confident and ready, chuck the metal down the hole. 1, 2, 3, down the hatch. Alright, mask on. Let's see. Looking good. Let's get it out. Alrighty, another smoky one. Let's get this out. Extra metal around that stone that I don't really need there, but that's easy enough to take off, so I'll just file that back. And you can see that the metal has gone all the way underneath, which is perfect, so you've got a nice strong design. So all I need to do now is just remove some of this extra metal so I can see more of that pretty sapphire. Now at the moment the sapphire is a little bit dull. Firstly, it's very hot, so it's not its normal colour. It'll come back to its normal colour. But secondly, it's got all this residue on the outside of the sapphire because all that smoke has left residue on the surface, so it's dull and dirty. But we can clean that up easy. So sometimes the ultrasonic will do it, sometimes if you put it in your pickle solution. Other times I just lightly heat it up with my flame and that'll burn off all that residue and get it back to looking bright and beautiful. Cool. Alrighty, there's that ring. Again, probably blacken it and then rub it back because I'm a sucker for that texture. All right, so the very last thing I'm going to be showing you in this video is how to use the vertical flask. So I'm just going to let's do a pair of earrings. I'll do a pair of earrings with the vertical flask, just to show you how it's a little bit different and it can be more useful in getting some of your tricky castings to work. So let's get to it. Alrighty, so I've shown you how to do a few things in the horizontal flask. I'm going to show you how to do something in the vertical flask, just so you can see the difference between the two. It's pretty much the same. It can just help you cast some designs better than a horizontal flask would. So you've still got your male half and your female half. And you still pack your male half first. Cut off that excess. Alright, let's talcum powder up that surface. Alright, I'm going to do a pair of earrings. So, back there and there. Alright, push them into about halfway. So I want these guys close but not necessarily touching. Alright, closing it up, lining up that square. Right. Loose clay first, pressing it down with your fingers. And then you can do some bigger chunks. Cutting off the excess. Okay, pull it apart nice and evenly. There's our earring impression. So let's get them out. Alright. Now I've got to create a channel for that silver to flow down to get to these earrings. So we want a channel going from there to there. So sort of like a funnel. So I'm doing sort of like a funnel. The middle to get in there, and the middle to get in there. Do something similar on the other side. And again, you want it to be nice and smooth. No loose bits of clay. Alrighty. Now I'm going to place some stones right in the middle of these. So I'm going to cut all this out. To make way for the stones. Alright, let's get a bit of purple. Okay, nice big sapphire. And looks about right. Bit of purple on the surface that's going to be sticking to the clay. Doesn't have to be heaps. Okay. About that. I'm going to push it down a bit. You don't want to push it down too much. Because if you push it down too much, you're going to push it out of the silver version. So we still need the silver to wrap around part of the stone. So if you push it down too much and there's not much stone for the silver to hold on to, it'll just pop out of your silver version. Just cleaning up some loose bits of clay. Alright. Stone number 2. A little bit of purple on the side that's going to be stuck down. Right there. Okay, push it down, but don't push it too deep. A little bit of loose clay around that stone, so I'll just get that off. Alright, let's close these two and open them again and see what those stones are doing on the other side. Ooh, there's a little bit of an impression. Yeah, I reckon I'll take that clay away so that the silver's flush with the stone. Cool. Alright, last thing I do before I close this up to cast it is air vents. Now, because the sprue hole and funnel are at the top here, we can put these air vents on either side, male or female. Open that up. Alright. Close it up and let's cast. Alrighty. A little bit of a different setup to how we've been doing it. It's because if we didn't have something wedging it together, it would roll everywhere. So I've just used these 2 bricks to hold it together. I'm sure you'll find many other inventive ways of doing the same thing. Alright, resting the crucible against the flask just like before. Heating up that lip and keeping that metal molten. And then when you're ready, dump it down the hole. 1, 2, 3, down the hatch. Alright, mask on. Now you've got more of a chance of this aluminium flask being hot because of how close that metal is. Alright. So just be careful. Let's open it up and see if it worked. There we go. Let's get it out of the clay. Alrighty. It's a lot easier to get at, isn't it? Simple as that. Alrighty. Studs completed. I'll show you everything we've learnt today. Alright, these are all the projects we cast today. So we went through just a plain pendant, then a plain ring, then a pendant with a stone and a ring with a stone, and then we used the vertical flask to do a pair of earrings. Alright, well, thank you for watching my tutorial, and hopefully this educated you and helped you along with your own creative journey. Of course, this is not the only way to do it. This is just the way I do it and the way I'm teaching you to do it. And there's so much more to learn, so many more different techniques and different ways of applying all the things we learn. So I could just do endless videos, but this is the first of hopefully many. And I'd really appreciate some feedback. Was this video educational? Did you learn anything? Hopefully you did. Let me know how I can make it better. Also, let me know what I did right, because that's always really important too. All right, well, I look forward to hearing from you, and happy creating.